You make a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way.
I'm telling you, it's the only way to go. It makes everything so much easier.
I think I'll give it a try.
Before we continue with our part 2, the billionaires who fell in love with a gatekeeper, make sure that you are subscribed and like. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss anything on these Tales by Video 10. Sit back, relax, we start our journey.
Zainab walked out to the garden carrying a small flask of cold hibiscus zobo drink to relieve Balarabe from the intense afternoon heat. They stood together under the wide shade of a neem tree near the gatehouse, the sweet scent of the drink mixing with the dry air as they spoke in low, gentle tones. Balarabe spoke of his deep love for the land, explaining how his grandmother had taught him to read the weather by looking at the color of the clouds, his voice carrying a peaceful warmth that made Zainab forget all her societal burdens. "You have a beautiful way of looking at the world, Balarabe," Zainab said softly, her eyes resting on his strong, honest face as she leaned slightly against the rough bark of the tree. "In this house, people only look at the value of things, never their beauty, and it makes me feel like I am living in a very beautiful museum where I am not allowed to touch anything." Balarabe looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, aching empathy that made her breath catch in her throat, and he reached out his hand, pausing for a brief moment before gently placing his fingers over hers where they rested against the tree. "A beautiful bird should not be kept in a cage of silver, madame," Balarabe replied, his voice a low, rhythmic whisper that vibrated through her entire being. "A bird belongs where it can fly, and it breaks my heart to see your spirit trapped behind these heavy iron bars every single day." That simple touch broke down the remaining walls between them, unleashing a torrent of emotion that they had both tried so desperately to suppress since the day they first met. They did not speak of grand futures or forbidden promises, but in the quiet safety of the shade, their hearts spoke a secret language of mutual invisible longing. Balarabe began to write short, beautiful poems in the Hausa language on small pieces of brown paper, folding them neatly and hiding them inside the daily newspapers that he delivered to the house each morning. Zainab would retrieve the papers with trembling hands, rushing up to her private sitting room to unfold the hidden notes, her heart racing as she read his sweet, simple words describing her beauty like the Kano moon and her kindness like the first rain of the season. Meanwhile, Omar's worry continued to grow like a dark shadow in the corner of his mind as he watched his mother's transformation from a distant observer to a woman deeply in love. He saw how she chose her outfits with extra care, selecting soft flowing fabrics that matched the colors of the garden, and how she constantly looked toward the front gates whenever a car approached the house. One evening, as he sat in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of water, he caught his mother staring out the window at Balarabe, who was lighting the outdoor lanterns for the night. The look on his mother's face was so filled with pure tenderness and aching desire that Omar felt a sharp pang of fear in his chest, realizing that this was no longer a simple friendship, but a profound connection that could ruin them all if his father ever discovered the truth. As the segment drew to a close, the peaceful isolation they had built began to face its first real test from the outside world. The heavy rumble of Alhaji Sani's returning convoy could be heard from down the street, the bright headlights of the armored vehicles cutting through the gathering dusk like sharp knives. Zainab pulled herself away from the window, her hands shaking slightly as she smoothed down her Ankara dress and prepared herself to face the cold, demanding reality of her official life once more. She looked out one last time, seeing Balarabe standing at absolute attention by the open gate, his face reverting to the blank expression of a loyal servant, though his eyes remained fixed on the front door of the house, waiting for the next secret moment when their hearts could meet again in the shadows. The golden dust of the Harmattan season continued to blanket Kano City, but inside the billionaire's mansion, a different kind of storm was beginning to gather, silent but incredibly heavy. Alhaji Sani was a man who noticed everything when it came to his business, from a missing bag of cement to a single decimal point on a financial balance sheet, and it was only a matter of time before he began to notice the subtle changes happening within his own home. He began to look at Zainab with sharp, questioning eyes during their quiet mornings together, noticing that she no longer complained about being lonely and that she spent an unusual amount of time looking out at the gardens. Her face, which had been dull and tired for so many years, now carried a strange glowing radiance that Sani could not understand, and because he could not buy this new happiness with his money, it made him feel deeply uneasy and suspicious. One hot Thursday afternoon, Alhaji Sani decided to return home early from his corporate headquarters without informing anyone, wanting to catch his breath before a massive dinner party he was hosting that very evening for the city's top business executives. As his black armored vehicle rolled silently up the paved driveway, Sani's sharp eyes caught sight of Zainab standing near the edge of the veranda. Her body leaned forward as she laughed heartily at something Balarabe was saying while he trimmed the hedges. It was not the polite, quiet laugh she used with Sani's business partners. It was a loud, beautiful, and completely free laugh that Sani had not heard from her lips since the early days of their marriage. Sani's jaw tightened behind the tinted glass of his car, a dark bubble of anger rising in his chest as he watched the young gatekeeper smile back at his wife with an expression that looked far too familiar for a servant. When the car stopped, Sani stepped out with a heavy thud, slamming the door so hard that the sound echoed off the high concrete walls of the compound like a gunshot. Zainab's laughter died instantly in her throat, her face turning pale as she quickly pulled her silk wrapper tightly around her shoulders and stepped back into the shadows of the house. Balarabe dropped his gaze immediately, bowing his head in deep respect and returning to his work with a sudden stiffness, his heart hammering against his ribs as he felt the intense, burning stare of the billionaire locking onto his back. Sani did not say a single word to either of them. He simply adjusted his expensive gold watch, walked past his wife with a cold, thumping stride, and locked himself inside his private study, leaving a thick cloud of tension hanging in the air. As the evening approached, the mansion transformed into a bustling hive of activity for the grand dinner party, with expensive catering trucks arriving and elite guests filling the brightly lit living rooms. Omar dressed in his finest traditional clothes, but his mind was completely detached from the wealth around him as he watched his mother moving through the crowd like a beautiful ghost, her eyes constantly darting toward the front door where Balarabe was busy directing the guests' luxury cars. Omar could see the dangerous cracks forming in the family's foundation, and he could feel his father's cold, calculating gaze tracking his mother's every movement from across the crowded room. During the dinner, Sani raised his glass to toast his company's success, but his words were sharp and laced with hidden meanings, speaking loudly about how a man must always protect his property from thieves who try to slip in through the back door. The true breaking point of the evening came when a heavy rainstorm suddenly opened up over Kano City, sending torrents of water crashing down onto the driveway and threatening to flood the lower courtyard. Alhaji Sani, wanting to show his absolute authority in front of his wealthy friends, stepped out onto the covered porch and shouted into the dark, ordering the gatekeeper to clear the blocked drainage pipes in the middle of the freezing downpour without an umbrella. Zainab, who was standing nearby serving drinks to the guests, watched through the glass doors as Balarabe dropped to his knees in the mud, his clothes completely soaked and his body shivering as he worked to clear the debris under the blinding rain. The sight of the man she loved being humiliated so carelessly broke something deep inside her, and without thinking, she made a small, choked sound of pain that caused several guests to turn around in surprise. Omar quickly stepped in front of his mother to shield her from the guests' curious looks, gently taking the silver tray from her trembling hands and whispering for her to go upstairs to her room before she gave everything away. Alhaji Sani turned around from the porch, his eyes narrowing into thin, dangerous slits as he saw the raw, tearful agony written across his wife's face while she stared out at the freezing gatekeeper. In that single, frozen moment, the unspoken truth became blindingly clear to everyone involved, stretching the invisible thread between the billionaire, his wife, and the gatekeeper until it was completely ready to snap into 1,000 pieces under the heavy Nigerian sky. The morning after the great storm, the air in Kano City was thick with a heavy, suffocating humidity that made it difficult to breathe, matching the dark mood that had firmly settled inside the billionaire's estate. The luxurious mansion felt less like a home and more like a battlefield where no one was speaking, yet every look was filled with a dangerous weight. Alhaji Sani left for his office unusually early, his face carved out of stone, leaving behind a silence that felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. Zainab remained locked in her private sitting room, her heart aching with a mixture of intense fear and a deep burning anger at how cruelly Balarabe had been treated in the mud and rain. She could still see the image of him shivering under the downpour, and it made her realize that the golden cage she lived in was no longer just a lonely place. It was a prison that was suffocating her soul. By mid-afternoon, a sudden and unexpected crisis erupted that shook the entire neighborhood and threw the mansion into absolute chaos. A massive electrical fire, caused by the heavy storm damaging the main neighborhood power transformers, broke out just outside the estate's high concrete walls, quickly spreading to the dry brush and heading straight toward the mansion's secondary generator house. The loud, crackling sound of flames and thick black smoke began to pour over the walls, causing the kitchen staff and the indoor servants to scream in panic, running out into the courtyard without any direction or leadership. Omar rushed downstairs from his room, trying his best to organize the terrified staff, but the wind was pushing the fierce heat directly toward the main house, threatening to engulf the entire structure in a matter of minutes. In the midst of the roaring confusion, while everyone else was running away from the danger, Balarabe did not hesitate for a single second to protect the people inside. Knowing that the billionaire's expensive automatic fire systems were tied to the main power grid which had just failed, Balarabe grabbed the heavy manual fire extinguishers from the gatehouse and ran directly toward the blazing generator building. The heat was immense, cracking the glass windows and throwing glowing embers into the air, but Balarabe moved with a fierce, brave determination that shocked everyone who watched him. He wrapped a wet cloth around his face and battled the roaring flames, his muscles straining as he single-handedly stood between the destructive fire and the house where Zainab was trapped on the upper floor. Zainab ran out onto the balcony, coughing from the thick smoke, her eyes searching wildly through the haze until she spotted Balarabe fighting the fire below. Seeing him risk his life so selflessly filled her with a sudden, absolute clarity that completely washed away all her remaining doubts and hesitation. She realized that Alhaji Sani, with all his billions and his powerful connections, was completely absent when the world was actually burning, while the humble gatekeeper with nothing to his name was standing in the heat to keep her safe. Omar ran up to the balcony to pull his mother down to safety, but he stopped when he saw the look of total devotion in her eyes as she watched Balarabe finally extinguish the last of the dangerous flames, saving the entire estate from destruction. When the fire was completely out, Balarabe collapsed onto the grass, his face covered in black soot and his hands blistered from the intense heat, gasping for fresh air as the servants gathered around him in awe. Zainab walked down the grand steps of the veranda, completely ignoring the rules of society, the staring eyes of the servants, and the worried calls of her son as she walked directly to where Balarabe lay. She knelt down in the dirt right beside him, using her expensive silk wrapper to gently wipe the black soot from his forehead, her tears leaving clean tracks down her beautiful face as she looked into his tired eyes. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion so deep it could no longer be hidden from the world. "You saved me, Balarabe, and I am not going to let you stay behind these gates alone anymore." Omar stood on the porch, watching his mother openly hold the gatekeeper's hand in front of the entire household staff, and he knew that the moment of final choice had arrived. He could hear the distant, familiar horn of his father's returning vehicle at the main road, signaling that Alhaji Sani was coming back to see the aftermath of the disaster. Omar looked at his mother's determined face, then at the brave man who had just saved their lives, and instead of calling his father or ordering Balarabe away, Omar made a quiet decision of his own. He walked over to the main gatehouse, took the heavy set of keys from the hook, and walked back to hand them directly to his mother, giving her his silent blessing to finally step out of the golden cage and choose the true love she had found in the dust of Kano City. The heavy iron gates of the mansion stood wide open as Alhaji Sani's convoy rolled into the courtyard, the headlights cutting through the fading smoke of the afternoon fire. Sani stepped out of his vehicle, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and confusion as he looked at the burnt generator building and the gathered servants who were still whispering among themselves. His sharp eyes immediately scanned the courtyard, locking onto the empty gatehouse and then moving toward the front porch where his son, Omar, stood entirely alone. Sani demanded to know where his wife was and why the gatekeeper was not at his post, his loud voice booming across the empty space as he tried to reassert the absolute control that had slipped away from him during the chaotic afternoon. Omar looked down at his father from the top of the veranda steps, his posture straight and his expression filled with a quiet, mature calmness that Sani had never seen in him before. Instead of shrinking away from his father's anger, Omar walked down the steps and handed Sani a small, neatly folded piece of paper that Zainab had left behind on the kitchen table. Sani snatched the paper, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded it to find a short message written in his wife's elegant handwriting, telling him that she was leaving the mansion forever and that she was choosing a life of true warmth over a lifetime of empty riches. The billionaire stared at the letter in absolute disbelief, his face turning from red to a pale, cold gray as he realized that all his money, his cars, and his high corporate status could not buy back the heart of the woman he had neglected for nearly 20 years. Meanwhile, far away from the stifling walls of the wealthy estate, a small commercial bus was traveling along the dusty highway that led out of Kano City toward the peaceful countryside. Inside the bus, sitting near the back window where the cool evening breeze could reach them, were Zainab and Balarabe, their hands tightly locked together between their seats. Zainab had traded her expensive Swiss lace and heavy gold jewelry for a simple, beautiful Ankara dress, and her face carried a deep, unshakable peace that she had never felt inside her husband's palace. Balarabe looked at her with eyes full of pure devotion, his blistered hands holding hers gently as he promised to spend the rest of his days working hard to give her a life filled with real laughter, respect, and a love that did not require a silver cage to survive. Back in the city, the departure of his mother brought a profound change to Omar's life as well, giving him the courage to finally stand up for his own dreams against his father's crushing expectations. Sitting in his father's study later that evening, Omar calmly but firmly told Alhaji Sani that he would not be taking over the family corporate empire, choosing instead to follow his true passion for architectural design and community building. Sani sat in his large leather chair, looking older and more tired than he ever had, surrounded by his millions but entirely alone in the massive house. He realized too late that his obsession with power had driven away the only people who truly mattered, leaving him with nothing but an empty mansion and a quiet driveway where the heavy gates now remained closed. As the sun began to set completely, casting a brilliant orange and purple glow across the vast Nigerian sky, the bus carrying Zainab and Balarabe finally reached a small, peaceful village on the outskirts of the state. They stepped down into the soft, warm dirt, breathing in the fresh air that smelled of sweet earth and open fields, far away from the fast-paced greed of the city. They walked together toward a small, modest brick house, surrounded by green trees and flowering plants. The very same flowers that Balarabe had once tried to cultivate in the small patch of dirt by the billionaire's gatehouse. Holding each other tightly under the wide horizon, they looked forward to their new beginning, knowing that true wealth was never found in the gold of a palace, but in the simple, honest love shared between two hearts under the open sky. As the grand mansion fades into a silent, empty monument of wealth, a new dawn breaks over the Kano countryside. Zainab and Balarabe walk hand in hand into a life of simple truth, proving that the heaviest iron gates can never lock away the human soul. In the end, the billionaire is left with nothing but his cold gold, while two hearts find the ultimate riches bound not by a silver cage but by a beautiful, boundless love under the open Nigerian sky.